Hello and welcome to the Columbus Metropolitan Club. I'm Darren Maloney. I am a member of the Columbus Metropolitan Club Board of Trustees. It's great to see everyone here today. Today, we are pleased to host Superintendent Dr. Dan Good and a special conversation sponsored by Dispatch Media Group and the United Way of Central Ohio. Each are represented here by many friends and associates. Help us welcome them. And welcome Lisa Cortice, President and CEO of United Way of Central Ohio, to the stage to introduce our forum. Lisa.
Thank you, Darren. I'm honored to have the opportunity to introduce one of our board members at the United Way of Central Ohio, Dr. Dan Good. United Way strongly supports Columbus Metropolitan Club mission to connect people and ideas through conversation. And education is at the heart of one of the most important community conversations we can have. Educating our young residents to become skilled and confident members of our society is the opportunity and the expectation of our public schools. But too many of our students and their families face challenges outside of the classroom that make it difficult to get a good education in the classroom. Today, we will hear from a leader who has devoted his career to educating our children, and we look forward to hearing his expertise, his experience, and I believe his candor. Correct? The Superintendent of Columbus City Schools, Dr. Dan Good, and our host, journalist of the Dispatch, Doug Caruso.
Okay. Well, the reason we're here is because Columbus City Schools is the largest district in Ohio, and it's one of the most challenging to manage. It's responsible for the education of about 50,000 students, and it has a poverty rate so high that it made more sense to give every kid in the district a free lunch than to figure out who didn't deserve one. Not so long ago, administrators desperate to show academic progress were caught changing student records to make the district and their schools look better. And shortly after that, Dan Good was named superintendent and charged with righting that ship and making real progress. For the next few months, until he retires at the end of December, Dr. Good is the leader of this complex organization with a budget of about $1 billion, thousands of teachers, more than 100 schools, and dozens of programs. He's here today to talk with us about what's gone right, what's gone wrong, and what's left to be done at Columbus City Schools. Dr. Good, thanks for joining us.
A pleasure.
All right, so we'll go right to questions. Ready?
Yes,
All right, so when you were hired in 2013, the district was under investigation for data fraud. There was a tax increase heading to the ballot that would have shared money with charter schools. And perhaps worst of all, the district put the name of another candidate in its first news release announcing its new superintendent. I don't know if you remember that or not, but
who?
They did. It was somebody from Southwestern Schools. Once they corrected that, you were given 1 year. Now we're here 4 years later. How did that go? How have we done since then?
Well, thank you. First of all, I was given 6 months.
Oh, is that right? Okay.
Not a full year. And I think I'm so grateful to our Board of Education, and they're represented here today by President Gary Baker and W. Shauna Gibbs and Mary Jo Hudson, because they trusted me to set goals and to do what was needed to right the ship. And we spent much of that first day in conversations with the Auditor of State, sharing notes, understanding how severe the data manipulation had been, how in fact it had become the culture of the district, and how you could really segregate into two camps, those that felt they were doing what was required of them, and those that took extra steps and went beyond and created their own rules and then really changed many other attendance records and grades. And so that began the process of having conversations with administrators in the district to invite them to make a different choice about remaining with Columbus City Schools. In most cases, individuals did elect that, understanding that ultimately the Ohio Department of Education would also weigh in with disciplinary actions, which continue through this day. Others, we moved toward termination because they weren't as receptive to having a second start elsewhere. But most importantly, we brought in Dr. Klein, who became our new data czar and really helped us to identify processes that ensured the fidelity of the data that we collected, how we put it into the repository, how we extracted it, how we sorted it, how we interpreted it, how we used it to move the needle on student performance. And I think the results speak for themselves. So that happened relatively quickly. And some would consider that low-hanging fruit, myself included, because we were able to show significant gains in reading performance almost overnight. Because we were looking at real data that represented real cognition and cognitive gaps, and we were able to align our interventions, our treatments to those gaps, and we were able to close those gaps. And so that was the beginning, and the board and I had conversations within that 6 months about continuing our relationship for a couple of more years. And as we continue to sustain that momentum and found that there were other opportunities to make improvements so that we could ensure this district was on the right path for a long time, we congealed around a 5-year contract, and so we're coming to the end of that at this point.
Okay, great. Yeah, and so in that time, that levy I talked about earlier did not, that wasn't really your levy, right? You came in and had to you had a few months to sort of build that, and then it didn't go the way. So
it represented, the levy in 2013 represented the work of a commission, and there were over 50 recommendations in that commission report. But what the community needs to know is well over 50% of those recommendations we were able to implement even without passage of that levy. So things happened for a reason. It definitely gave us a roadmap. And like all maps, there are often diversions and better pathways to pursue the ultimate goal. And so not all 50 of those are still relevant, but many of them that are, for example, the preschool expansion, we've been very successful. We've expanded preschool by 22% in the last 4 years. So we're serving a third of the city's 4-year-olds in 5-star, high-quality early childhood education classrooms. And beyond that, we're supporting other providers as well in making certain that they have the materials and the training and someone with whom they can troubleshoot the preschool issues they have in their own settings, whether it be home providers or in other providers.
Okay. Along the way, you came from Westerville Schools, right? You were the superintendent of Westerville Schools, which gave you the rare experience of having been on both sides of the win-win agreement. This is the agreement in which suburban schools continue to serve parts of Columbus in return for payments to Columbus City Schools, and it's renegotiated every 6 years, and it was renegotiated on your watch. And for the first time in 30 years, it changed. Can you talk a little bit about that process and what its effect on the community is going forward?
Certainly. So there are a number of districts that are members of the win-win agreement. And these are districts where there are Columbus zip codes that are actually in different attendance areas, different districts' attendance areas. And in order for the privilege of those residents to be served by those districts, they do pay Columbus a fee for that privilege. But it always felt unstable to the residents in those neighborhoods of those districts. And we felt it was time for a modernization of that win-win agreement. And it had been in place, as you know, well over 2 decades. Sure. And it was time to begin to sunset the provisions in there. And the different school systems were very gracious in working with us to begin to taper off the payments to Columbus City Schools in exchange for solidifying those boundaries so there was no longer that instability, the question of whether students would actually be annexed back into Columbus because they had a Columbus address. And so we phased that in over the 6-year period, and we believe it's the right thing to do. And there are some bilateral agreements to that to accommodate special circumstances in some of those districts. And so Columbus did lose out on some taxes, but the alternative was the legislature was going to end it through language. And so even though over that 6 years we'll receive just 50% of what we otherwise would have received, had we left it to the legislature, we would have received nothing.
Okay.
And so that was the purpose of tapering off and still honoring that we want to congeal those boundaries for our residents and really modernize this agreement.
Got it. All right, well, now let's turn to an uncomfortable subject. Let's talk about your grades.
Which hasn't been uncomfortable yet.
Okay. Sorry. Well, I mean, you've talked about the pre-K expansion and third grade reading gains, and those have been impressive. But when the state report cards came out this last time, you had one D and a lot of Fs.
I did.
So, what should we be taking away from that performance? And
So let's take a look at the history. So 5 years ago, we had a report card that was an F report card, and it was a new metrics at that time. So as part of our strategic improvement process, or MAP, we identified where those targets were so that we could close some of those gaps. And it took us 2 years, but you may recall then, 2 years after that, we had A's and B's where we had D's and F's before. So lo and behold, the state once again changed the rules, changed the metrics, changed the assessments that were used to attain those metrics, and changed the percentage of students that had to achieve those metrics on those new assessments. So yes, in fact, we did score in D's and F's overall on the district local report card. But once again, we've used our strategic plan, we've identified those targets, and I would anticipate next year you'll see A's and B's replacing those D's and F's. That's what we do.
Are you talking about the building level or at the
district level? At the
Okay.
building level, there are a number of buildings that had A's and B's.
Sure.
We have lists of buildings that close the gaps on the 20% lowest performing students, our gifted students, our students with English as a second language. In fact, where 5 years ago we only had 5 buildings that had a gap in achievement between Caucasian and non-Caucasian students, today we have 36 buildings. So we're making significant gains in addressing the things that are important to our community and sometimes that are reflected on those report cards.
Okay. Just as a follow-up to that, these grades aren't really that out of the ordinary for urban districts or for charter schools that draw their students from the urban districts. Is it even fair to take districts that are facing high levels of poverty, high student mobility, high rates of unstable family structures, and evaluating them the same as everybody else? I mean, is this a system that's not fair to your district, or is it okay to keep going the way we're going?
One of the opportunities the State Department gave all districts was to publish what we have branded as more to the score, to show data that is important, that shows we're making gains. For example, we had almost a 10% increase overall in our third grade reading performance. I could go through each grade level and show the gains that were made 2 and 3 percentage points in every discipline, almost every grade level, showing that we're moving closer. We're on the right path to attaining those. Do I think it's a statement about the district, the overall local report card? To some degree I do, yes, provided you consider the details that I'm sharing today and that you all have access to online. What I think it's really a greater statement about is our community. And what as a community are we doing about mobility, about keeping students in housing? Because we know there's an almost direct correlation between mobility and poor performance. And so if we aren't allowing people to be place-bound through our social policies and the way we resource our families, we're contributing to that pipeline of failure. The same is true of the nutrition issues and the health issues. We're so pleased we have partnerships with Ohio Health and Nationwide Children's Hospital and OSU Medical that we now have clinics in our schools. So not only our school-age children, but their families soon will be able to get those health services right in their neighborhoods, and ultimately neighborhood families will be able to get those services even if they don't have school-age children. So when we begin to think as partners and as a community about how we're supporting the family as the unit of change versus just constantly focusing on the student and holding the education institution responsible for that social transformation, I believe we're going to see real gains. It's also why I've promoted heavily the mentorship program. We see extraordinary results when we have a mentor working with a student. They're 77% more likely to cross the stage at the end of their senior year when they're at risk at the beginning of their senior year if they have a mentor, someone that touches base with them for 1 hour a week, not just remembering their birthday, not just going to their baseball game or their band concert, but actually engaging with them and not judging them, but listening to them and helping them understand other choices, other options at their disposal, but having their back whatever decision it is that they make. In the end, they're making the right decisions and they're now crossing the stage. Can you imagine what a difference it would make if we had mentors for all of our families, not just the students? I know that I use mentors. A couple of them are here today. But people to touch base with to help keep us on that right track, link us to the resources that are necessary, and teach us how to fish versus throw us fish.
Sure. You're talking about wraparound services, essentially, that where a school can provide health care, even laundry, different kinds of things that make everybody feel more stable, more able to learn. That takes a lot of money. And over time, we've seen the state legislature, for example, says, here's the formula for how you're going to be funded, but we're going to cap you. Or you have to keep going back for levies. How are you going to, either how are you now or how should your successor go about finding the resources to make what you described happen, to make that possible?
Well, I think it's twofold. I think, first of all, we have amazing partnerships in this city, and many of the nonprofits around the room have pitched in to provide mentors. We have City Area with Big Brothers Big Sister, Boys and Girls Club, the YMCA, Girl Scouts, Boy Scouts, so many organizations that are doing that work that we might otherwise have to pay individuals to do, and they're doing it on a volunteer basis. We have, as I said, our health institutions that are supporting the clinics. We have the food banks. We have Charity Newsies that provides clothing to 13,000 of our families. They provide the uniforms that we require our students to wear. So there are many, many organizations doing their part. I do think it's time for the state to step up and do its part. We are now $103 million into the cap. Is that right, Stan? Into the cap, meaning we have 18,000 students for whom we don't receive the state funding that we should otherwise receive. We could do a lot of good in wraparound services and other academic sorts of interventions with that $103 million. And the interesting thing is, since they don't fund us for that many students, but if any of our students leave, they take off the per pupil funding from the little amount that we do get and send that to the other provider. So the system, we have some of the most brilliant minds in Columbus City School, and Stan Bohorik, our Chief Financial Officer, and Dr. Eric Roush, our Government Relations Liaison, that could really work with the legislature to help put together some models with others that make sense for our state. But we've come to a time where, as Buckeyes, we need to revisit how schools are funded, and it needs to be an equitable funding mechanism.
Okay. So that's a phrase that we've heard before in the DeRolf case. Yeah. Is it time to go to court try to,
Is it time to go to court? I don't think we would have to go to court if we can get, like I said, wise policymakers and educated experts in the same room together to draft some things that could be considered in these biennial budgets. So,
do you like to try it at the legislative?
I've always been one that believes if we use a collective, inclusive process, we're going to come up with a better solution than if we go through the court system.
Okay.
It's the same approach I use to resolving the data scandal.
Okay. In that vein, as you're looking forward, or as you're looking past your time in office, what do you wish you had been able to accomplish, and that you hope your successor is going to be able to accomplish?
I'm excited about those things that haven't yet been accomplished, because I don't think it was time for them to be accomplished yet. We had a number of things to address. Again, the pre-K expansion, reading improvement, additional pathways that responded to our employers' needs for careers, workforce-ready professionals, and of course the post-secondary focus. We need to address our facilities. How heartbreaking it was that And it was the right thing to do, dismiss school early a couple of weeks ago on Monday and Tuesday. Some of our kitchens, folks, were 106 degrees. I was in those kitchens, and I think people know I go to every staff member in every building and shake their hand at the beginning of the year. And I spend time in those kitchens, and I intentionally go in the buildings that aren't air conditioned on the hottest days as a measure of empathy, but also my own check to see just how debilitating those conditions can be. And it is difficult for students. Think of those elementary students, they're on the playground, they come in, they've been fed, they've been running around, and they come into a room that's over 90 degrees. You know, learning is not the first thing at the top of their minds. Unless you're at the Gifted Academy, which was one of our oldest buildings, not air conditioned, but somehow those little superior cognitives figured out to create their own little air conditioning systems. So I'm rethinking having them all in one place, and maybe we need to spread them around. But it's time for us to address those facilities. We, under the leadership of Ms. Gibbs and Mr. Peretti as chair of the Facility Master Plan updating, we addressed elementary and middle schools, but we really need to tackle the high schools. And we stopped at the right time because the conversation needs to be deeper. And we've had great leadership from teaching and learning to help us think about what our 21st century students truly need in their secondary education. Do we need a neighborhood high school in every neighborhood? Do we want to continue to do education on the agrarian calendar? Do we want to instead look at the fact that students get all of their information right here? They don't need the sage on the stage anymore. They need someone to help them understand what they're reading, evaluate that, consider other perspectives, and then use that in some meaningful fashion. And what a great city to do that. I envision in the future our students all being engaged in problem-based learning, where they take a problem, they come in, they use all the 5 disciplines to kind of chart their own curricular pathways so that they can use those learnings to help solve those problems in our community. And then a teacher becomes the consultant versus the giver of knowledge. Okay. And so that demands a very different kind of thinking about what high schools should be. And I'm so glad I believe our community, our innovation and reform committees are open to thinking about what those look like in the future. But I would not be a proponent of perpetuating what we currently have without really having that very broad conversation. And that's exciting work. I'll be available January 1.
Well, after that conversation happens, what would be necessary is money. I mean, I understand that the last levy, it was decided to not go after facilities money, not to ask for new facilities money. It was maintenance money. Are you saying that after this conversation happens, that then there should be a bond issue or some other tax to raise the money to go forward with updating the high schools?
Well, let's think about what we have right here in our city. So we're doing incubator projects right over here in Franklin to new buildings occurring. We have COSI here, a center of science and industry. We are a hotbed for higher education, research institutes, and also teaching institutes. We have the plans for a new finance park, which is kind of BizTown, a simulation city for students to learn financial literacy skills. But this is more for secondary students and even adults and families. I think the conversations we're having about the future of high schools ought to include the people that are supporters of those institutions as well, because maybe it makes more sense if you're using a consulting teacher model and the students interested in the biomedical careers that they're doing that at the OSU Wexner Center East, or they're doing it at COSI through a virtual experience. And so I think we need to have more partners around the table and begin to align and be more efficient with our limited resources. I don't think it should be the burden of the board or the school system or even on the community that just the school has to create these edifices, because I think they exist already in many cases. There'll still be new building required. But I also think we need to be open. We didn't anticipate being able to air condition many of our single-story buildings when we did the Operation Fix It, which was part of the bond package that the community supported in 2016. And but through the marvels of engineering, they've discovered a way for less than we projected to be able to air condition at least 3 of those buildings, and we'll be doing more. So that changes even our facility master plan. Do we now need to rebuild those buildings, or can we just rehab them a little bit?
So you want to look for alternatives?
I do want to look. I think we're obligated to do that. So
Great.
undoubtedly.
Okay. Well, now everybody's going to be sad to see you go. But it seems like...
Not everybody.
Okay. But when you retired in 2013, the first time, from Westerville.
Yes, sir.
You went out at the end of the school year. Schools have they do a school fiscal year, so you're basically ending on June 30th, starting on July 1st, right? This time, that's not what you're doing. You're going out halfway through the school year.
That's right.
And it just, it's going to make it maybe more difficult for them to find somebody new. Somebody might have to break a contract if they want to come before June. I'm just wondering why the urgency to go.
So the board president and I had discussions about this well over a year, that when the time came for that separation from the district, I believed, as the state's largest district and being in the capital, that we had an obligation to propose a new standard, a new model. And to me, it still makes sense. And when I talk to search firms, it still makes sense. In January is when we begin to project what programs, what budget, what staffing we're going to need for the following year. So if you wait to bring in someone new until July, they've already missed that process, and they have to live with Dan Good's decisions for a whole year and a half before they can put their thumbprint on the work. And maybe they can do some tweaks here and there. I think it makes more sense for Columbus City Schools in particular to get out ahead of the peak recruitment period, which is in the spring. And I know it's working because I'm getting calls from people I would be honored to work for that are interested in coming to Columbus. It doesn't mean they have to begin in January or February, but it does mean we're out ahead of all the other players, and it gives them time to think. It gives them time, if they commit to Columbus City Schools, to begin to meet the senior leadership staff that are here today, and to understand, interview them, find out if they're a right fit, talk about the programs, influence the budget, and then hit the ground running in July. When I was in Worcester, prior to Westerville, I was actually hired for Westerville in November of 2007. But Worcester said, we don't want you to go yet. Could you stay the year? And so we worked out an agreement between Worcester and Westerville, and I would spend 2 days in the one district and 3 days in the other. And then I would flip the following week. It was the hardest thing and the best thing I ever did, because I had the opportunity again to influence the programs, the budgeting, the staffing, and we hit the ground running. And in both those districts, we hit excellence with distinction and stayed there 3 years in a row. So it works.
Got it. Just because you don't have any, it's not because of tension with the board, there's nothing kind of pulling or pushing you out?
No, there should always be tension with the board.
Oh, okay.
It wouldn't be a healthy relationship if you didn't have tension with the board. That's where the great ideas grow, and where we find, we find our best next. And I said before, we have a business relationship, but it's a very respectful relationship as well. And you only have to hold up. I wish I would have, I'll make this available. It's the report I give to the board each year about all of our achievements, our accomplishments. And I say "our" because it's really a community report, what we have all done together, because everyone's working together. But to me, this is evidence that no matter what your perception may be about how the 7 elected governments work with their direct reports, we've achieved some pretty astounding gains. And not only that, we've codified those things that are working, so they will last far beyond the board and Dan Good, the things that are working. But there's still opportunity to do others. But no, you wouldn't want a board that's always going to say yes to me, and you wouldn't want me to always say yes to the board.
What are some of those things that you have had disagreements with the board on?
Not going to let this go, are you?
No.
So when I announced that I was going to retire, Ms. Gibbs said, what can we do to get you to stay? So that's an example of those things where we have dialogue and we help each other understand. And I was sharing with Lisa yesterday when we had lunch that change theory says you have to do 3 things. You have to raise awareness, deepen understanding, and make personally relevant that which you want changed. And I think that's been one of the hallmarks of our relationship, the boards and mine, when we take the time to discuss things out loud respectfully and really get to understand the position, the perspective each person brings to that conversation, and then relate how this personally impacts my constituents as a board member or the district that you oversee, Dr. Good. Then we're in a place where we can begin to adopt new attitudes and behaviors, and that's where change occurs.
As you look forward, have you given them any advice on who you think or what type of person you think should come next? And what are your thoughts on that?
So I've not given advice directly to the board. The board has contracted with a search firm, and that firm did interview me for what I felt they needed to have.
Okay.
And so I shared a few, things that I thought would help make them successful. And one of them was kind of Pollyanna. I said that quite honestly. And I'll tell you 3 quick stories. Can I do that?
I think you have about a minute, 2 minutes left.
2 minutes left? Okay, so I share the story of Stephen. I shake the hands of every graduate at the end of the year. It's why we stagger the graduation times. I go as they line up, I put a wristband on the graduate, congratulate them. As they go on the stage, I leave. I never have to see a single graduation that way, but I see every graduate. And the one graduation, Columbus North International, Kenny Lee is here, who leads that school. He has a student named Stephen, and when I shook Stephen's hand at the end of the graduation, he wouldn't let go of my hand. And I thought, I haven't met him before, something's going on here. I'm like, congratulations, and he introduces me to his family. He just kept holding onto my hand. And I said, Stephen, are you okay? And he got these big tears in his eyes. And he said, I want to go to college. And I said, well, you can go to college. Did you fill out college applications? And he said, I did. And I said, did you fill out the FAFSA? And that's when the tears started to roll, and he's still holding my hand. And it dawned on me at that time, Stephen is Latino. Here's his family with him, all undocumented individuals. For him, he's going to become DACA, right? And if he were to fill out the FAFSA, it could have been disclosed that his family was undocumented and potentially could have been deported. That was a huge decision for him. So what Stephen needed from me was support, some guidance. And so we hooked him up with I Know I Can, marvelous organizations. Stephen's now actually completed 2 years at Columbus State. He's doing very, very well. It's been paid for. His family's still here. Another story.
Well, before you do,
Yeah.
I'll let you tell it. But we're going to move to audience questions very soon, in just a few minutes, right after he tells this story. So don't be shy. Step up to the microphone. And so go ahead with your story.
So my second one is a young man named Larry. I go to every building and shake every employee's hand, cafeteria workers, secretaries, the teachers. Used to give them hugs. Won't be doing that anymore. But I went in one building 2 years ago, and the first room we went into, there's a young man in timeout. He's probably a 5th grader named Larry. And I thought, well, I used to teach 5th grade. I can handle this kid. So I invite Larry to come with me. And I think he gave me the bird. But as I'm going through the building, I noticed Larry was a little bit behind me. And the further I went through the building, go in rooms, greet teachers, come back out, Larry was closer to me. Then Larry started going a little bit ahead of me, opening the door, going into the room. By the time we were at the end of the building, Larry was bursting down the hall, slamming open the doors, screaming, Dr. Good is here, everybody on your feet. I put Larry back in timeout. So the point is, Stephen needed my support. Larry needed my direction, right? And then the third Larry I told about at the Chamber of Commerce meeting before, and his name was Larry too, a 3rd grader. We do an honors and recognition ceremony each year, and at the end of the year, all those 3rd graders that reach the promotion mark, we give a certificate to. It's at East High School, our biggest stage. The board gives them the certificates and greets them. I stand on the other side of the stage, have a picture taken, they exit stage right. And little Larry came up to get a certificate, and there was no certificate. And the staff, remember, we were horrified. His eyes were getting bigger and bigger as they scrambled. I'm like, don't cry, come on over. Let's get our picture taken. Larry, wait right down here, in the front row until the ceremony's over. We'll get you your certificate. And so he did. He got off the stage, and he stood right there and watched me the rest of that hour. And as soon as it was over, he hopped right back up on the stage, and the staff knew that if they didn't find it, they were going to make one right then, a certificate. And so when we gave the certificate to Larry, and he just kind of discarded it, and had his picture taken with me and his mom. And his mom said, you don't get it, do you? She said, it's not the certificate that's important to him. She said, he wants to be you. And I thought, wow. So and that was my message to the search firm. Sometimes they need the support, sometimes they need the direction,
right,
but they always need the love. And don't ever underestimate that no matter what your skin color, no matter what your creed, your sexual orientation, your gender expression, no matter what have you, they know authenticity. And for some reason, all 3 Larrys found authenticity in me. And they find authenticity in all of us when we offer that. So my big message to you is every one of you can be a mentor. And until we start mentoring every child and every family in this city, we're not going to be able to see that full-scale transformation that we deserve. And I will tell you, San Francisco just discovered that. We discovered it 2 years ago. Just went to a conference in, where were we? DC, where we talked, it wasn't DC, where were we, Larry? Or Gary, where were we? Cleveland, no, DC, Cleveland. So, and I had the chance to host Houston and Chicago and San Francisco. And the things they told me that they're doing, I'm thinking, oh my goodness, we're so far beyond that in what we're doing here in Columbus. And Shauna was there, and I'm thinking, how do we get that word out to our community that this district is on the right path, baby, and we just need to sustain that momentum. And I'm doing the lateral pass for someone that can do that, because I can't work 18-hour days anymore.
All right. Well, thank you. All right. Well, it is the CMC's tradition to take audience questions. So the microphone is right over here. And if you come up to ask a question, please state your name, ask your question, and in consideration to everyone, please ask a question. Don't just editorialize to us. We'd love to hear your question, but we can talk about your views later. So the first question, please.
Yes. Hello, my name is Mary Urena, and thank you so much for being here today, Dr. Good. I was wondering if you could expand a little bit more upon the teacher role in the future that you envision for education, specifically having many friends who are educators who have expressed frustration to me about the teach to the test mentality that's developed over the last 10 years.
Right, thank you. And I think everyone heard the question. You know, I think one thing we need to do is understand tests have come a long way. Now, I wouldn't say that Ohio has yet embraced all of those tests that truly are good indicators that someone has assimilated new knowledge and can apply that in foreign contexts, but that's what you want a test to do. That's how you know when they've truly learned something. Good tests are going to measure those things, and you want to teach those things then that you want to be measured. So teaching to the test isn't a bad thing as long as the test is really measuring those things that we expect students to know and be able to do. Unfortunately, in our state, Mary, as in many states, we over-test. There's so much testing occurring. There's so many diagnostics and so many additional requirements to do beginning of year, middle of year, end of year assessments that it's almost created an environment where we're spending more time assessing than we are treating. What we learn are those gaps. We were talking about this yesterday. One of the things we put into the levy was really generated by our teachers, particularly in our post-performing schools, where they said if we had an additional pair of hands to help us with some of that testing and that reporting, the record keeping, that would be beneficial. And so we identified instructional assistants for those. So it's like a teacher's aide that would come in a half day, each day to your classroom to help assist you with that. Because I don't think the answer is extending the teacher's day. They're spent by the end of the day. They work so hard nonstop and are so tuned in to students' needs. But if there was an additional person there that could assist with that, I believe it would help. I also believe it would help them tailor more of the curricula to the students' needs, because that teacher's assistant could then begin to take a look at the materials and sort them and prepare them for the teacher so they have the right intervention that aligns to whatever the miscue is in their cognition. So I think it's changing now. We're beginning to see more and more of that, probably a little slower at the secondary level, which is where we're working as professionals. It was interesting, we had a professional development day a couple of weeks ago, and our teachers get this. They understand all this. They understand the importance of differentiating and customizing, tailoring curriculum and instruction. What they're challenged with is, okay, how do we organize for that in a classroom? How do we manage a classroom where you may have 25 people doing very different things so that they're still on task and accountable for outcomes? So that's where we are in terms of our professional development. But you're right, it's changing, and it needs to.
Hi, I'm Trip Lazarus. Thank you, Dr. Good, for being here and for having been here in your role. I just wanted to follow up a little on why you are leaving. I did hear something at the end there about 18-hour days, and what you're looking to do in the future here.
Thank you. So one of the things I'm going to do is a little different. I did retire from Westerville. I got caught in the state pension system changes where I could have worked more years, but I would actually be earning less than what I collected once I did retire. So I had to lock into that. And so my last day with Westerville was June 30th, and my first day with Columbus, July 1st. So there was no time between the two. This time I want to take a little bit of time because I want to reflect on what it is that I'm meant to do next. And I feel kind of fortunate. I didn't seek this job. I hope the board's not offended about that, but there were members of our community, leaders in our community, and friends that called and asked me to have conversations with the board president, with the mayor of the city then, with others, other people that have previously served on the board or were leaders of other objective organizations. And I think you know when it's meant to be. You know, the hair stands up on the back of your neck and you think, I'm supposed to do this. And it's really pretty cool because it wasn't to avoid the dispatch, really, but that they had me go to Fort Hayes to, I forget what the building number was, building number 5, go to the 3rd floor, it'll be all dark, knock on the principal's door, and someone will meet you there. And I thought, this is odd. And lo and behold, this little lady rolls up with her fingerprint machine, and they fingerprinted me that day. And then, I mean, it was just a matter of hours before they cleared my background, and the board had offered me the position. So, I mean, it wasn't all overnight, but it was a pretty abbreviated timeline. I want to take a little longer than that this time to decide. And I do, I think most people know I have family in Wasilla, Alaska that I haven't seen for some time. I'd like to spend a little bit of time with them. Generally 3 days is enough to spend with any family. And so, yeah, so my mother hit a landmark birthday this October, and so I made a commitment to take she and her husband on a cruise. So we're going to do a little cruise. If we can still go down to Mexico, I'm not sure. But so I have a couple of things I want to do for a couple of months, and I'm a firm believer that the universe kind of tells you what's intended next. So.
Good afternoon, Pat Losinski, CEO of the Columbus Metropolitan Library. First of all, Dr. Good, we have our team with us from CML, and I want to publicly thank you for being an extraordinary partner with us as we work with you to try to improve reading scores in the out-of-school time where we try to focus. So thank you for all of your efforts. I would ask you to reflect a bit upon the kindergarten readiness scores, another testing that has changed over time, as well as the 3rd grade reading guarantee. Tell us how those fit together, and what are your thoughts for how we get to a point of even stronger performance and stronger gains in the years ahead?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in the state of Ohio, students are required to have a kindergarten readiness assessment. I don't think it's actually called that anymore, but it's something like that. And you would think there would be some predictive validity on how well the students do on that test as to how well they're going to do on the 3rd grade reading performance. And unfortunately, we're not necessarily validating that correlation at all. So it says a couple of things to us, and it's kind of a conversation we have with the state board relative to the alternative assessment to the 3rd grade reading guarantee. The tests weren't equated appropriately, and so we need, Pat, to really take a look at that KRA and the kindergarten readiness assessment and understand if the non-language assessment items are truly valid indicators of students' literacy building blocks, because again, like I said, it's not equating well with the 3rd grade state standardized achievement tests. So there's work to be done there, but the American Institute for Research is working on it, NWA MAP is working on it. There are a number of organizations that have taken on the challenge to see if they can find relational qualities between those two tests. And I'm not sure if that's where your question was exactly, but I'm very concerned because we tend to use that KRA as the predictive measure for 3rd grade readiness or 3rd grade reading, and we're just not finding that's always the best measure. So a big part of it is many of those students don't have the literacy skills to perform well on a literacy assessment, and so we use a lot of non-language based assessments now, especially for our new Americans, and I'm wondering if we ought to use more of those for our kindergartners, if those would be better predictors of the success. Nice psychoanalytic question there. Good job.
All right, we have another question?
Don Dehoff from American Electric Power. Obviously, the pace of technology in our society is continuing to increase, and it seems like online schools are becoming more and more popular all the time. If we look to a future where online schools are the norm or the preferred method, How does the existing infrastructure for public education fit into that new world?
Yeah, great question. So, and does it supplant it at all? So in Columbus City Schools, we now have a 2-to-1 ratio, 2 students to every laptop. So online education is actually occurring in many of our classrooms already. We use different software programs that give immediate feedback and then tailor the intervention or the remediation based upon the student's wrong answer. So they're helping to close those gaps in cognition. So online learning doesn't necessarily have to be outside the school building. The reason I say that is schooling in urban settings fills other social functions as well. You heard before, we provide a free breakfast and lunch to every student. We provide supervised afternoon activities, transportation home from those activities. And we launder clothes. We have washers and dryers in many of our schools. We provide clothing for the students through Charity Newsies. So schools do more than just address what students need to know and be able to do. They're also teaching a lot more about those soft skills that we expect our students to have. And that's really one of the losses, I believe, in strictly online schools, where you're losing some of those soft skills around communication, creativity, the collaboration, all the C's. But I don't think it'll supplant it ever. I think we'll continue to see different blended learning formats.
Thank you. I'm Jane Scott from the Metropolitan Club. You mentioned in one of your comments about having family-to-family mentors. That idea has come up here before at the Metropolitan Club, but I don't see anything like that really bubbling up anywhere. Talk a little bit more about that, some of the advantages that you might see with that. And, you know, we have the United Way in here.
Right.
We've got other folks
That's
in
right.
here. Who might champion that, and how would it work?
That's right. And great question, and there are organizations doing that. So let me just speak to one and not to diminish any of the others' efforts. Choice Neighborhood, where the city's invested $66 million in grants to redevelop the Poindexter neighborhood, right, over here on the Near East. And it displaces families for a while they renovate the homes and the neighborhoods, putting in markets, health clinics, education centers, and then returns them there, and in the hopes that those multi-generational families will return and celebrate the new Poindexter. One of the things early on that was evident that was needed were these family mentors. They call them caseworkers. And so they work directly with those families to make certain we're placing the fresh food markets close enough so that they don't have to rely on public transportation to get to them. The clinics, the same thing, that the higher education course offerings, for example, through Columbus State Community College, are ones that are of interest to the families there. So the caseworkers are really helping to shape the whole fabric of that social experiment there. And it's working. We've seen, from a school's perspective, we've seen an incredible decrease in the number of absences and disciplinary incidents at Champion, at Trevitt, at Beatty, all of those schools right in their neighborhood. We've seen an uptick in enrollment at East High School now. And so there are a number of ancillary data sets that would indicate it's working. But what I saw yesterday at our Choice Neighborhood Executive Council meeting was data that shows those perseverance and tenacity attributes of families are increasing as a result of working with them. And again, what I shared with Board President earlier today, they're teaching them how to fish. They're not just throwing them the fish. They're not just giving them things. They're showing them how to get them for themselves, because people want to be independent. But it's an experiment that's working, and we could learn something as a community about that.
Are there any other questions out there? Anybody? You have another minute or two if you want, or we can go to Darren.
So if I could, I just want to say thank you. It really has been a privilege. It's been an honor. They truly have been very, very long days, 16, 18-hour days. But you know what, when you're passionate about something, you run on that adrenaline. But like people that are on their world tours or their rock songs and stuff, I see why they stop. Because there comes a point where you have, but you can be so confident that we've built this incredible infrastructure. We have an amazing leadership team now. We have the most diverse administrative team and that we've had at least in the history I'm familiar with in Columbus City schools. So things are going to continue to move forward because we've codified those things. And that's when you want to give it to the person that can take it to next. So I just appreciate the opportunity to work here for the last 52 months and hope in these next 2 months we can make certain that we can ensure that sustainment and you have confidence then and will support the next leader of the district and the board. So thank you. You did all right, right? Good job. So thank you.
Well, I was going to say, I hope you enjoyed today's forum, but I think we did. We encourage you to continue the conversation with coffees and cookies in the back of the room. You can view and share today's forum and all of our forums on CTV, Columbus Television, on WOSU, and PBS affiliates statewide through the Ohio channel and anytime on CMC's website via YouTube. Let's thank our sponsors again, United Way of Central Ohio and the Columbus Dispatch. Thank you. And again, thanks to Doug and Dan for being here today as well. And thanks to all of you for being here. We look forward to seeing you again next week. We're adjourned. Thank you.